Hi, and welcome to Focal Point AFR Talk, this Thursday edition, 888-589-8840, number to call. You know, we talked with you about this blowout bash for Michelle Obama on her 50th birthday on Monday night and how all the beautiful people were there. All the one percenters were there, the people that Obama spends the other 364 days a year demonizing and blaming for all of America's ills. People are in poverty because the rich have ripped them off, taken all their money, and that's why they're rich. That's why they're the one percenters. It's not fair. So he has this huge blowout bash, nothing but the one percenters there. And they confiscated all the cell phones so nobody could take pictures of the beautiful people sipping champagne. I mean, this is the time where his whole theme in the State of the Union address next week is going to be income inequality and what a terrible, terrible thing income inequality is and how it's the responsibility, it's the fault of the rich. And then he's partying down with these people. Rob, I lied. Let's grab clip number 16 if we can, the Ted Cruz clip, see if we can find that one. This is Ted Cruz talking about this whole business, this campaign of President Obama on income inequality. I'll talk about this more tomorrow, a couple of great studies about how you get rid of income inequality, how you get upward mobility. But President Obama is going to hammer the rich, the very people he partied down with at Michelle's 50th, on income inequality. He didn't want anybody using their cell phone to take pictures of President Obama getting down with the 1%, getting down with the greedy rich people that have impoverished all of America. That's bad for the image when he's going to harp on income inequality. And here's Ted Cruz talking about the reality of what we're dealing with here.
The essence of irresponsibility is seeing a harm, seeing the facts, and refusing to act. What else do we know? We know that Obamacare is killing jobs all across the country. Indeed, Obamacare is the biggest job killer in this nation. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said of small businesses impacted by the employer mandate, 1/2 of small businesses say they will either cut hours to reduce full-time employees or replace full-time employees with part-time workers to avoid the mandate. 24% say they will reduce hiring to under 50 workers. The president has recently been talking about income inequality. This exacerbates income inequality. It's why the rich have gotten richer under President Obama. But the people who are struggling, young people, Hispanics, single mom, people like my dad, who 56 years ago washed dishes for 50 cents an hour as a teenage immigrant, those are the people getting their hours reduced because of Obamacare. Those are the people getting laid off because of Obamacare. Income inequality is increasing. And Mr. President, what has the Senate Majority Leader and Senate Democrats done to protect Obamacare, to protect Americans from Obamacare? The answer is simple: nothing.
So Ted Cruz saying, you want to talk about income inequality, President Obama is primarily responsible for it. This gap is widening. Whose fault is that? It is President Obama. We saw that study the other day that talking about who has reaped the benefit during times of whatever you'd call recovery or whatever. Under President Bush, his recovery 2002 to 2007, the top 1% reaped 63% of the growth. Under President Obama, the top 1% are reaping 95% of the growth. The rich are getting richer because of Barack Obama. Now, because of this stuff and the illegal actions of President Obama, more and more people are beginning to use the I word. I want to play clip number 12. This is Megyn Kelly talking with Mitch McConnell, who, by the way, is in trouble in Kentucky. He's got an insurgent campaign up there. Matt Bevin is running against him. Matt Bevin is starting to get some real traction in his campaign against Mitch McConnell in the Republican primary, just like Chris McDaniel doing the same thing in Mississippi against Thad Cochran. You got a number of these where you have some conservatives that are really Tom Cotton in Arkansas. He's raising money faster than the incumbent Mark Pryor is. Now, that's a Republican versus Democrat. Chris McDaniel in Mississippi, Matt Bevin up in Kentucky, they're going up against Republicans in the primary. And there was an article today, national media, about how much money Chris McDaniel has been able to raise in just 10 weeks, $500,000. So he's hot on the trail of Thad Cochran. So anyway, Megyn Kelly is talking to Mitch McConnell, and here's one of the reasons why Matt Bevin is taking on Mitch McConnell. He doesn't have an answer to what is a very good question from Megyn Kelly.
But let me ask you about that, because we've had lawyers, constitutional lawyers, come on this show and say, okay, so when that happens, when you have a president who, in your view, or the view of some, is out of control in terms of overreach, you, as a lawmaker, really have two meaningful options. And the main one that has been used historically is try to impeach him. I mean, is that Is that ever considered as opposed to running into the courts and trying to get them to do it? The other one is to try to defund the president's legislations, which, of course, you guys have tried before.
And he doesn't answer the question. I didn't play the rest of the clip because he wouldn't answer the question. He slid off of the question. Megyn Kelly let him go. But my point is the significant thing is not even Mitch McConnell's answer. It is the question that Megyn Kelly, on the leading cable network in news right now is Fox. She's got a program that's almost as highly rated as Bill O'Reilly. She's asking the question. That's what's significant. Megyn Kelly, leading conservative news outlet, asking the minority leader in the Senate, are you thinking about impeaching Obama? And you go back to the time when Clinton was impeached, when people would bring up the I word, it was scandalous. People would just pop a vein if you even brought up the term. And now people on the right are openly talking about it, and people on the left. I'm looking at a piece here on WND.com written about Nate Hintoff. Nate Hintoff was the guy that wrote for the Village Voice for 51 years. So this guy's arch-liberal, been arch-liberal all his life, and he is now calling for the impeachment of President Obama. He's one of the most famous journalists in America, especially on the left. He says it's time to begin looking into impeachment. And he said this to WND, he doesn't give a whoop about the separation of powers. Never before in our history has a president does these things. This is the worst state, I think, the country has ever been in. And this guy's noted for being a civil libertarian and the conscience of civil libertarianism and liberalism for decades. And he is now openly calling for the impeachment of President Obama. He has no right to do these executive orders, Hintoff insisted, his voice reaching a crescendo of indignation. And then he goes through the list of the things that President Obama has done to flout the law and flout the Congress. So that's the significant thing. Voices on the left, voices on the right, openly talking now about impeaching President Obama for his overreach and his defiance of the law, defiance of the Constitution. Let's go to the phones, 888-589-8840. Let's go to Douglas, Marion, Ohio. Douglas, welcome. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for your work. My wife and I love your show. My best friend, Chad, and his wife, Tiffany, love your show.
Thank you very much.
Your work for the Lord and for this country.
Appreciate that.
Real quick, I just wanted to ask what your take is on an issue with abortion that my friends and I talk about quite often. How is it that the state can actually press charges against someone for vehicular manslaughter, 2 counts for killing a pregnant woman, yet the state won't recognize that unborn child as a life? And the other thing that I wanted to throw in there real quick, a listener of your show, and I've never disagreed with anything that you've said except for one thing. A couple months ago, you said if they outlaw guns, only outlaws will have guns. I wanted to correct that. My wife and I will have guns, and I assure you we will be patriots, and we will not be outlaws. God bless you. I love you, brother. I'll hang up and listen to your comments.
All right. Thank you, Douglas. I appreciate that. And you know what I meant by that is if they outlaw guns, we're not going to disarm. Douglas is not going to disarm. I'm not going to disarm. You're not going to disarm, whether they make it illegal or not. We're not going to disarm because we have a Second Amendment right, a God-given right to self-defense and self-protection. So we would be outlaws in the eyes of the law, but not in the eyes of God. And remember, I read that excerpt from Letters from the Birmingham jail where Martin Luther King Jr. said, look, if it's an unjust law, if it's a law that does not comport with the laws, the moral law of God, then it is not a just law at all. In fact, it says you got an obligation. If it's an unjust law that's out of phase with the moral law of God, you have an obligation to disobey that law and no obligation to obey it. All right, Doug, I appreciate that. And, you know, Doug is exactly right on the pro-life issue. You got this real schizophrenia in our legal code that's completely irrational because what Doug is talking about, most states, under their vehicular homicide laws, for instance, if a pregnant woman is killed in an automobile accident and the baby she carries dies, then from a legal standpoint, there are 2 homicides and not 1. Remember that cop, that Peterson guy, the Lacey Peterson case, the guy that got prosecuted and convicted for murdering his pregnant wife. She was like 8 months pregnant. Her baby died. He was prosecuted for 2 murders, not for 1, because he killed a woman and he killed the unborn baby that she was carrying. So and most states have laws that do provide for the prosecution for homicide if an unborn baby dies because the mother of the baby is murdered. You can prosecute the perpetrator for both of those. And yet when it comes to abortion, there's this complete schizoid. It's irrational. It makes no sense. And it's just another indication that people on the left, they don't think, they just feel. That's one of the, as conservatives, we have to think. We've got to use reason. We've got to use research. We've got to use data. We study history, just like this guy talking about the impact of Protestant missionaries. Where'd that come from? The study of history. So we study history. We use logic. We use reason. We use data. This is what Charles Krauthammer was talking about. The pro-abortion position is anti-science. Britt Hume, it's anti-science. The only way you can be for abortion is to be against biology, to be against anatomy, to be against genetics, to be against medical science. You've got to be anti-science to find a way to justify and promote abortion. So you get away from the abortion issue and talk about vehicular homicide, for instance. People will use science. Yeah, that's an unborn baby. That's an infant. It has a right to life. If you take that life without cause, you're going to have to answer for that. 2 victims and not 1. So appreciate the calls this hour, just thanking me for the work I'm doing. It's just an honor to be in front of this microphone every day, have the opportunity to have a constitutional classroom of the air, and to provide you with what I consider to be apologetics for politics. That's what this is about, apologetics for a biblical worldview. Well, that's it for today. Bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap, and never forget, as the debate over abortion is proving, we are fighting a winnable war.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.